Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome to another episode of Poland Daily History. Today we are in the Praga district of Warsaw, in front of a statue of one of the great war heroes of the Polish Bolshevik War, Father Ignacy Skorupka. This statue is located right here, as he served this very church, and it was from here that his unit set out to confront the enemy. In early August of 1920, the Soviet Red Army was closing in on Warsaw. They were only a couple hundred kilometers away from linking arms with the Soviet revolutionary forces of Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Join us as we explore the Polish Bolshevik War, the Battle of Warsaw, and its impact on all of Europe. On August of 1920, the Communist Revolution came to the doorsteps of Warsaw. And how were the Poles able to defend their capital city?
Polakom nieoczekiwanie przyszedł z pomocą pewien drobny fakt.
Unexpectedly, a small fact came to the rescue of Poles. Tsarist troops evacuated about 1 million Poles from Poland to Russia to continue working in their armaments factories. These Poles saw the Bolshevik Revolution with their own eyes. They saw the crimes, they saw the chaos and terrible barbarism. And when they could come back to Poland in 1918, 1919, they told everyone what was waiting for Poles in the East. As a result, almost nobody was fooled by the communist propaganda. The Bolsheviks were disappointed, not so much with the resistance of the Poles, but with the lack of support for brotherly help that was to come from the East. Poles did not consider the Bolsheviks to be brothers. They considered them to represent the barbaric Asia, which destroys and loots. They were the Hun dynasty of the 20th century. As it turned out, they were correct. And then a very shocking thing happened. A national uprising spontaneously rose. Troops were created to defend individual cities. The Bolsheviks practically failed to capture a larger unit. Only some small groups that got lost were captured and murdered almost on the spot. We know a lot of such places, hence one of the Soviet troops, the 4th Horse-Drawn Division, was virtually entirely sentenced by a Polish court to death for terrible crimes. When they were taken prisoner, 280 were shot near Mława. Just one who turned out to be an honest man and who had earlier saved the life of a Polish cavalryman. The soldier had the right to ask someone else to join him, and only these two were spared. The rest of them were sentenced to death, deservedly anyway. The Soviets failed to play off the Poles against each other. Small groups of Polish communists saw the Soviet crimes and immediately gave up on communism. Even the government that was to be created in Białystok for Poles had to be brought from Moscow, because none of the locals wanted to belong to it. This government was co-created by the communist Marchlewski, who had nothing to do with Poland's independence. There was also a very bloody Pole-Lithuanian, because he was born in Lithuania, Felix Dzierżyński, a several Polish Jews who also tried to replace us with legal authority. Let us add that heroic resistance was placed in 3 places around Warsaw when the Battle of Warsaw began. There is a small town called Mokra, of which we know very little, but there Captain Pogonowski died, who defended with his unit to the end. He knew that he would die, but that his death was needed so that all other units could gather around Radzymin. Radzymin, a small town with the eye of God's providence in its coat of arms, changed hands between the Poles and Soviets several times before, on August 15th, the Poles drove away the Bolsheviks. Finally, a small town east of Radzymin, Ossów, in which chaplain Ignacy Skorupka led a squad of students to attack while he was carrying a cross and dying defenselessly because he had no weapon when administering the sacrament to a wounded Polish soldier. He became a symbol of the whole battle, and today in Ossów there is a very beautiful initiative, a wall of gratitude on which 4 boards have already been hung. They are in gratitude to the Hungarians who sent all their ammunition to Poland, the 12 American pilots who tirelessly navigated in the air defending against Bolshevik planes, French sappers and a military mission that supported our activities, primarily the supply of weapons, and Polish Armenians who fully took the Polish side and became, as it was said, twice Poles.
I stali się, jak to mówiono, dwakroć Polakami.
So you're telling me that in these 2 places the Poles were able to stop the onslaught from the communists, but I was wondering, when did the counterpunch happen and where did it came from?
Trzeba wspomnieć, że Polacy mają dobrą pamięć historyczną.
It must be mentioned that the Poles have a good historical memory, and it was very carefully remembered that 90 years earlier, in 1830 and 1831, the Poles did not carry out a maneuver that would cut off Paszkiewicz's army that surrounded Warsaw from the west. We simply failed to gather such forces, and we lost the uprising. Although, for 90 years, the Poles thought it over very well, and when Paszkiewicz was replaced by Tuchachevsky, Chief Military Commissioner, Marshal of Soviet Russia, at this point the plan of former generals returned to this plan, and a maneuver was carried out from such a small but important Wieprz River. The Wieprz flows south of Lublin, south of Warsaw. Indeed, the Soviet army went too far west, and a gap appeared, which the Poles successfully entered. It is difficult to talk about the Battle of Wieprz River because there were no Soviet troops there. There were individual units that, at the sight of a powerful army, simply fled. Poles chased the Bolsheviks for 3 days to fight a battle at all. Ultimately, huge masses of the army were encircled. At night they broke through, and the Poles set traps for them. But there is one interesting thing. One of the Polish troops found a huge Russian division sleeping in the forest. The commander forbade the killing of sleeping soldiers. He said to wait until they wake up, and then you can fight them. Indeed, it was only when they woke up that they discovered that they were encircled. They stood up to fight, some gave up, and some fought. In this way, they did humanely what was not done on the other side. Ultimately, the victory over Wieprz tipped the balance. The Bolsheviks did not expect this. They did not even know that they lost, and for the next 2 to 3 days continued the offensive towards the west. Even after that, they didn't really have any way to retreat. The troops crossed the border of East Prussia. The Germans were terribly afraid of them, so they were quickly transported to Lithuania, despite that they should have been interned. Also, the Polish population who lived in Warmia, Missouri remembered those troops as bad as possible, bloodied, dirty, and above all, ragged. It was an army of paupers that was fed there for some time, and Piłsudski did not interfere with this maneuver, although this army should be interned, should not be released. He agreed with this because he rightly noticed that an army, once scared, would escape from the battlefield once again. This happened in September, when the Poles circled the Bolshevik army once more and liberated our borderlands. Unfortunately, the Poles were mostly out of ammunition. Polish cavalry occupied huge areas in the east, and when the truce with the Bolsheviks entered into force on October 18, 1920, about 200 to 300 kilometers further east than their future border, Polish guards were already at their posts. Besides, the Ukrainians went with us wanting to rebuild their Ukraine, but the shock of the previous Battle of Warsaw was so great in the nation that the Polish parliament removed Marshal Piłsudski from power, who advised against an early peace settlement. He said that you can't negotiate with an opponent until he is beaten, that it's not possible to negotiate with an opponent who hasn't been completely crushed, because the opponent will lie and cheat. Unfortunately, he was right. Despite that, negotiations began in Riga, the capital of Latvia, which also survived thanks to the Polish victory. The Latvians were very delighted that the Poles won because they saved their independence. The Latvians also saved us Poles the entire Powiat, which they took from the Bolsheviks, and when the Polish army arrived, they received these lands. In this situation, negotiations in Riga took the shape of a tender, whether the Poles want to receive compensation for the fact that they were in a Tsarist state, a sum of 30 million zlotys rubles, gigantic already at the time, or land. Poles chose the money, but never received it.
Milionów złotych rubli, gigantyczna suma już na tamte czasy, czy też ziemię. Polacy wybrali pieniądze, których nigdy nie dostali.
The Battle of Warsaw was the decisive point of the Polish-Bolshevik War. It saved Europe from an imminent communist invasion and gave Poland a vital 20 years as an independent state before the outbreak of the Second World War. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.